actually, if you just look roughly towards the computer and things, and then,
Okay.
well, actually, the camera that's the big camera, this thing, yeah, that's it. Okay. So it's not really an interview, but hello, Bob. This is Basis 137, and we've already used a little bit of that on my the picture that you've got shortly, which we'll see, of a bunch of Nazis before they were paperclips.
Yes, indeed. I'm very well, thank you, Miles. Despite the fact that I almost became part of the depopulation agenda, it would if that survives. Now, the other thing, of course, is like look at the Statue of Liberty. There's people who think this represents liberty, but everything's an inversion with these entities. So the Statue of Liberty was donated by French Freemasons. And of course, the shards of light, spiraling out. It's all got a lot of metaphors and symbols, and it's nothing to do with liberty. It's about spreading Lucifer, and America becomes Babylon. So the inevitable destruction of Babylon goes back to Mesopotamia and Albert Pike and people like that. So yeah, so that's two separate things that I've been working on, which we can go into. Now, the third thing I've been working on recently, which I've really enjoyed. Because I'm a literature scholar, was your mate Francis Bacon. So you must know about the authorship debate.
Yes, I mean it's clear that there was a Shakespeare as part of the group, but it was completely constructed by Francis Bacon, and then you got John Dee and all that.
Yeah, this is an absolutely fascinating time in English history, because this was really the establishment of the British Empire.
And of course his relationship with Queen Elizabeth I.
Yeah, his mum, Queen Elizabeth I. I've got a lot of information on all of these things, but just to put it in a nutshell, Francis Bacon was the Virgin Queen's son by Robert Dudley, who then became the Earl of Leicester. At that time in Tudor times, this was the most incredibly complicated and secretive time, because John Dee was part of this world, part of Bacon's world. So I also spent a few months in Stratford-on-Avon digging into all the Shakespeare myth. And I had my suspicions then because of various things that I discovered. But it was only recently when I thought I'll move away from the Nazi stuff and do some light work. So I started looking at Bacon, because I knew that he was extremely significant, but I didn't realise how brilliant and important he was.
And then there's Saint Germain.
Yeah, I got a little bit on Saint Germain. But what Bacon did at that time, the Queen Elizabeth I employed a lot of sorcerers and magicians and occultists, astrologers. This is a time when esoteric knowledge was kept among the elite, so they had access to a lot of esoteric knowledge, and it was through Rosicrucianism, prior to that Knights Templars, that a lot of these ancient knowledge goes back even before the Knights Templars, obviously, but this is all passed down among these bloodlines, and it was Bacon that really started the British Empire, started the intelligence services, controlled all these things. Absolutely brilliant man. And Queen Elizabeth I was employing John Dee, who was employing Edward Kelly. There was people burning each other at the stake. There was a lot of intrigue. London at that time was just like one big secret service. So Dee was probably the first 007. And Dee was working with psychic researchers as well to get advance over the Spanish, and Bacon, being Elizabeth's son, he had a legitimate right to the throne, but their families were intertwined, and even he was born next door to the Globe. At 12, he went to Trinity College. He spoke French, Latin, Italian, Greek, Hebrew. Well, at that time, why is he fluent in Hebrew? Because there was no Jews. They were kicked out in 1292, I think. So there was no significant Jewish population in London. But of course, how he mastered Hebrew was because it was the language of gematria. So Bacon was a bit like Crowley. He had incredible gifts for accessing information or channeling information. And of course, he was very much part of that world where, like they were channeling stuff through archangels, entities, demons. At that time, this was very much part of court life. So a magician would be as likely to be in Queen Elizabeth's court as an economist or a scientist. So at that time, magic was interlocked with science, and it was only the separation had to come because this information was what's called esoteric information or Gnostic information. So it was Bacon that moved Rosicrucianism into Freemasonry, through a lot of sleight of hand, keeping this away from the masses, and he created a whole new language. Really, English was created because prior to that it was a guttural German style. So what he did brilliantly was adopt. All spies are actors, so they're 24/7 on stage. So he adopted Shakespeare, who a supposed peasant from Stratford-on-Avon who had no education, who could write all these plays and sonnets, and of course the level of information in things like Macbeth, Hamlet. It's full of Rosicrucian symbolism, and when I studied Macbeth and Hamlet for years, under professors, if I'd known what I know now, I could have really come at it from a much more accurate point of view. But of course, that's why the educational establishment is pushing these fake narratives. I can go into this in more detail, but using Shakespeare was an absolute stroke of genius because at that time there might have been a William Shakespeare who went to London and became a jobbing actor, but of course he wouldn't have access to these things. And a lot of the information that Bacon was emitting through these the Shakespeare plays was concerning Italy, Machiavelli, what was going on in Venice with the oligarchs, what was going on in Rome, the mystery schools, the level of mythology. So he's created the Shakespeare myth, and I don't know where to. I don't want to go into individual plays, but you look at something like Macbeth. You've got the three witches, again, witchcraft, and they're always behind the scenes. And for me, that's military or secret societies, intelligence, always operating behind the scenes, cursing people, ill-wishing people. Then you got the lady whose child was untimely ripped from her womb. Now this is also a metaphor for for not natural childbirth. And of course, during Shakespeare, people wonder why men are always dressing as women and women are dressing as men. Well, it was Bacon that started introducing the concepts of transgender, which became a very significant movement, especially it really started it with the theatre.
Why?
Prescriptive people.
Why
Because
did
you
he
can
do
program
that?
people. You can program people through art and literature, and the masses were becoming to accept this thing. And also it was a way of passing on messages, through symbolism. So you think of all the things the world's a stage. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of things that Shakespeare invented, a whole new language. And this was the Shakespeare myth. And I'm not going to go too much into the literary side of it. I mean, Hamlet, is unbelievably full of occult metaphor and black magic. But even the other day, just thinking, like outside the box, just like sitting around and musing, when you think Shakespeare was born on St George's Day, April 23rd, died on April 23rd, which became St George's Day. He was a Rosicrucianist. I mean, we won't go into New Atlantis because that's, as you probably know about that, America. He set up the slave trade at Jamestown, very significant in establishing Freemasonry lodges all over America, and that's all Rosicrucian belief systems that are moved into easier for the people to be dragged into. So the Red Cross, the flag, the whole English myth, the Tudor Rose. Thing I had to laugh at the other day when I was looking at just thinking about what we don't really want to talk about is that I heard someone say, I think it was an American podcast, someone talked about being William Shakespeare, and then it was obvious that was a code word for the V thing. And I thought that is a brilliant code word because Britain, it's one big lie. I was given.
What do you mean by the
Shakespeare.
V thing?
Well, the vaccine.
Oh, sorry, we didn't
So
say that.
you talk about being William Shakespeare. I think then I made the connection. Who's the first person in England to take the vaccine? Well, you couldn't make it up, but his name is William Shakespeare, a 90-year-old man. So it's another way of mocking the public because Shakespeare didn't exist. And
I think the minister concerned couldn't hide himself from laughing. He was laughing his head off.
well, this is it. Like, they are now literally mocking the sheep, and I mean, that just about says it all. The world's a stage. It's all made up. Everything we've been told is pretty much not true, and I've come to this realization over the last few years, of having lived believing that Shakespeare was a great writer. And the other thing as well, look, I grew up listening to Desert Island Discs, Word Plumley, and the two books
that's a program on BBC Radio 4.
It's when famous people, actors or politicians, select their 8 records, and I've done the Cornish version of it, where you choose records that if you were stranded on a desert island disc, at the end of the program they said, well, there's 2 books that you can choose a book, but there's 2 books that are already there, and the 2 books are the complete works of Shakespeare and the Bible, presumably the King James Bible. Well, the Bible, King James, who rewrote the Bible, was the king after Queen Elizabeth died, who Bacon was involved with. He actually didn't. He kind of discredited Bacon, kept him marginalised. But
he also wrote a book on demonology.
He wrote a book called Demonology. He was an expert on witchcraft. Of course he was, because that bloodline, were all heavily involved with the witchcraft. So he was also, involved with John Dee, and also his descendants, the descendants of James I, were became presidents of the United States. I've got the details. One of them was Buchanan, who was after Pierce. So the mere fact that those 2 works are already puts an assumption in people's heads that these 2 sacred texts really define what it is to be English. Every man, this peasant who wrote all these plays and sonnets, and it wasn't just Bacon that wrote them either. Bacon was head of the Shakespeare project, so he was the overlord. He also had other people write them, like I suspect Ben Jonson, and Ben Jonson, who was a really fine playwright at that time, made the quip that what was it? Francis can never resist a jest. So there's all these in jokes among all these plays where they're alluding to each other. And another guy, Christopher Marlowe, Christopher Marlowe, is a poet. He's also an intelligence agent. And at that time, in a pub in London, there was lots of underground spying, and nobody could trust anybody, with regards to Elizabeth and Walsingham. Virtually everyone was an agent. And he was actually shot in the eye in a pub, and it kind of reminded me of the Blind Beggar, pub in where the Crays assassinated one of their enemies, and it's almost like this. That's a satanic or a Freemasonry assassination. So even then, it was very much going on in Tudor London at that time, which is why the Shakespeare project had to be kept undercover, and to a certain extent, it still is. So people, if you can sell them a lie, as Goebbels said, like a big lie, like you can invent a whole character of William Shakespeare, and then that's the name you use for the first person to be vaccinated. I mean, I think one can draw our own conclusions about what we're being told.
Well, what are your conclusions about it?
Well, the British Empire, the sun hasn't set, and when I look at the work of the Fabians and how influential they are with their own scholars, with the infiltration of other intelligence agencies, the globalist agenda, it looked as though it was working, and I don't know whether it is now still working, because it seems as though the 1/3 of the world is shrinking. So I think they either got complacent or they don't care, because it's a scorched earth policy as well. So ultimately, to bring in transhumanism, you have to wipe out humanity. So they're very dangerous opponents, because, as usual, they don't mind losing. So it doesn't really matter who wins the wars. The end policy.
Well, they don't mind losing because they think it can come back, but they won't be able to come back this time.
Well, it just depends what... See, they believe that they're getting away from this thing about mortality. So, even talk about people like Musk and things like that, the whole thing about being part of the Borg, being part of the cloud, it's a way of becoming immortal. And of course, they can occupy other bodies, as long as they can download their information. So a lot of the information they have will be decoded into them or programmed into them from because DNA takes, some people say it's 12, I've heard it's 15 generations to disintegrate. So, you know, our own DNA, my DNA, which I feel very attached to because of what my ancestors have done. Incidentally, one of my ancestors took part in the rebellion to overthrow James II in 1685. So, hence my rebel not taken brand. So, you know, I feel personally attached to a lot of this history. So I think we're in the thick of it now, and well, I can't really offer any solutions, but I think everyone has to fight their own battle. And
well, you've written a number of other books, and you've done a number of other things. So tell people where to get stuff. And
well, my website, where I did the Cash is King project, of course, which I might revisit because that's going to become very important in 2025 when they try to do the bank run-ins, and I was ahead of the curve with that. I've got a website called www.rebelnottaken.
Could you say that again? Rebel Not Taken.
www. Rebel Not Taken, REBELNOTTAKEN, and that's a website where there's a little bit about me, and it's got all my books. None of them are expensive because I don't want to make any profit on them.
And you can buy those from Devices Books
you
here
can also
in Wiltshire.
Buy my last one, Zennor, from Devices Bookshop, which is just around the corner, a very good bookshop. And I'm actually, if I get the energy, I'm working on my next book now, which encompasses a lot of these themes that I've been looking at, and it relates to my ancestry. You know, I've also got Nephilim bloodline through my mother.
Now, how do you know you've got Nephilim bloodline? What tells you it's got? You look that up on a book. I'm a Nephilim.
Well, I know it sounds a bit preposterous, but I was interviewed by the BBC about it because my great uncle was a guy.
And when were you interviewed by the BBC?
2 years ago.
So that might be available on BBC iPlayer.
It's on BBC Wales.
What's the title of the programme?
George the Giant Augur. This is a long story, but to cut to the quick, in 1900, he's Queen Victoria's private bodyguard. He was also the second tallest man in the world.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And I'm going to write a whole chapter about that. I wanted to do a book on it, but I'm just going to...
And it's partly in the book, we're running out of time, but it's partly in the book, Zennor, Spirit of Place.
Effectively, you know, they've got this thing. The BBC told, when I told them about this, they said, "Well, you mean giganticism?" I said, "Well, not necessarily giganticism. There are people that, obviously, we all know about the giants that are found all over the world that are, you know, put in the Smithsonian Institute, take possession of them and hide. I mean, literally thousands of these giants.
The Canary Islands, a lot of them.
Yeah,
are in North
Cornwall
America.
too. You know, Cornwall's got its own giant myths. So, you know, I'd like to think that my great uncle was a throwback. You know, whether you call it Nephilim or you believe the Nephilim story, you know, that again you're into conjecture there. But I quite like that concept that if there is a bloodline, and certainly, you know, a lot of my family are very strange. You know, my father couldn't read or write, but he was an absolute genius when it came to a lot of things. I could play chess when I was 7. You know, I get visited all the time. So, you know, I like to think there's something beyond this. I don't really trust the science. I trust magic.
But that's because you've got a different way of thinking and accessing knowledge. You can almost remote view it. Or you can.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I know about remote viewing. I'd say it was more as a poetic intuition or the analeptic process. I mean, it could be remote viewing, but I know that when I go to sleep at night, I go to a lot of other places. And I had an instance last week. I had to get a witch in to exercise my bedroom, around my bed, because I had a visitation. Not a nice one. Someone trying to get in my bed, and so you know, a lot of these things happen to me ongoing, and
well, maybe they be happening to you a lot longer going.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. You know, I've gone down that road a bit with accessing past lives. You know, with at various times.
So, in closing on this Sunday, the 11th of August, in the conservatory with the sun shining, or maybe not shining all the time, any final words? Well,
no, I just want to say that, you know, I appreciate giving this opportunity to get all these thoughts together, because you know, everything's been very random with me. I've written books, I've had exhibitions, I go from you know, drama to drama, country to country. So it's good that, you know, I've got a lot of information, which I think is kind of unique. in a way, because they're coming at it from a different perspective from the usual people who might be termed researchers or truthers or whatever. You know, I don't really get too involved with the spiritual aspects of it, but I appreciate the opportunity. As I said, I could carry on going into detail about all these things. I'm quite down to earth and pragmatic.
Well, next time.
So I'll do it, but I just want to say, if people are finding this interesting, well, I really appreciate it.
Well, I think they are. I think there's an Australian radio station found it interesting.
Yes, that's right.
They weren't too complimentary about me.
Huh?
They weren't too complimentary about me.
No, I had a couple of I call them Dumb and Dumber, who'd seen one of my podcasts. I think it was with the Amish Inquisition, another podcast I'd done about. That was about my life, actually, and I wanted to do quite a humorous one, so I was talking about the psychic stuff, and they mentioned that I had a monkey called Wanker, which I did. So we had a monkey called Wanker and a parrot called Fuck Off, and these guys forgot all the other stuff I was talking about. I was talking about Parsons and stuff, and they used this clip to basically, with a photo of me talking about it, and that's all they used. And this went around, and then someone said, "Oh, you know, you're the laughing stock of this podcast in Australia." I think, well, I don't care. You know, I think it's quite good. So I tried to introduce quite a lot of humour into it.
Well, it actually shows how dumb and dumb they were.
Yeah.
They missed an opportunity.
Well, that's right. I do appreciate it.
And thank you, Bob, for giving the Basis Project an opportunity. It's great fun. Okay, well, thank you for part 8.
Thank you.